Hello there. My name is Jen Loki, and it is actually 9:26 if we're being honest, but 9:23 was when I started with my attempts for this. It takes a lot of practice, and the only notes I'll be using are the letters down below that you see here, which are the acronym Vernon cannot make my pet zebra laugh, for the facial bones, because I always seem to leave one or two of them out when I'm trying to list them by memory. And I also have a list of the items that I need to include in this recording. But other than that, I don't have any notes or anything. Sorry if this makes you nauseous. There's my dog. He's not going to help at all. Okay, so, and then there's books under there, but no notes. Okay, so let's start with, there's the axial skeleton, which is the more centralized skull and vertebral column. And then there's the appendicular, which is just the more peripheral bones of like the limbs, the more lateral bones coming away from the midline. So we're going to go through all the bones for both of those. But before we do that, let's just talk about the 7 classes of bones and an example of each. Pneumatized. That is for some reason, the one that I always forget. Pneumatized bones have air pockets. And so a couple examples would be the sphenoid and the ethmoid in the face, or the skull, really. Sutural bones form between where the sutures are, so between the flat bones of the cranium. Flat bones include the bones of the cranium. So flat, pneumatized, and sutural. We have sesamoid, an example of which is the patella, the kneecap. We have irregular bones, which an example of those would be any of the vertebrae. And then we have short and long. The short would be any of the ridiculously hard to memorize carpals or wrist bones. And then an example of long bones would be any of the limb bones, so like the humerus or femur. Okay, so those are the 7 types of bone. And in case I forget, I'll just say this now. If I'm going to be a physical therapist, I assume that I will be dealing with bones absolutely every single day, probably with every case that I have, because often it seems like people go to physical therapists after breaking a bone and then needing to build back up muscles that support that broken bone that weren't used while it was splinted or casted. So I'm going to be using my knowledge of bones, I assume, all the time. So that's why this is a very good unit for me. Okay, so let's start with the skull. Okay. So the skull, we're going to start with the frontal bone right here. Then on the sort of the superior portion, you have the left and the right parietal bones. You have the occipital here in the back. And then on the sides, the temporal, the left and the right temporal bones. Inside, like we talked about with the pneumatized bones, you have the sphenoid, which articulates with every other bone in the skull, which is really cool, and it looks weirdly like a creepy butterfly. And then the ethmoid, which is slightly anterior to that. Those are also part of the skull. All right, so now we're going to do the facial bones, and again, I'm going to use the letters to make sure that I don't forget. So we'll start with the vomer. The vomer is a portion of that nasal septum right in the middle, really thin. The chondra are beside those on either side, and they help swirl the air so that it gets warmed up, which is so cool. And nasal bones, so the left and the right nasal bones up here. Then we have the maxilla and the mandible. The palatine bones are L-shaped bones in the back of the hard palate of the mouth, the roof of the mouth. Z, we have the zygomatic, the cheekbone sort of deal. And then the L, we have the lacrimal bones, which are just on the medial side of the eye socket. Okay, so those are facial bones. Now we're going to, let's head back to the vertebral column. Keep going with the axial skeleton. We're going to start up here at the top and coming through the foramen in the occipital lobe, where we have the medulla oblongata and all of those giant nerves coming down. We have these protective vertebral cage or sort of case that is around that spinal cord. So the first one is really big compared to the other cervical spine or cervical vertebrae. So C1 is also called the atlas, and C2 is also called the axis. There are 7 total cervical vertebrae: C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, and C7. C3 through 6 are regularly shaped, and the cervical vertebrae that is the atlas and the axis, and also C7, those 3 are irregular. Okay. After that, the vertebral bodies are heart-shaped for this next one, which is kind of cool. And the thoracic vertebrae, and there are 12 of those. So the thoracic vertebrae have facets to connect to the ribs, which we'll get to in a second. So we'll start with T1, or thoracic vertebrae 1, or the first thoracic vertebrae. T2, T3, T4, T5, T6, T7, T8, T9, T10, T11, and T12. Okay, let's see if there we go. So, and then after T12, we move into the biggest types of vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae that carry the most weight, or support the most weight in the body. And there are 5 of those. So L1, lumbar vertebrae 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The 5th one is in parts fused to this next section here, which is the sacrum. The sacrum is made of the parts of 5 fused vertebrae. I guess it's easier to see from the back. And then the bottom part, the little tip down here, is the coccyx, the tailbone. So that is the vertebra, the vertebral column. Let's move back up here to the pectoral girdle. We have the scapula connected to the clavicle. In this mountain biking town of mine, lots of people break their clavicles all the time. So if I'm a physical therapist, it's probably going to come in handy to remember that one. Oh, which reminds me actually of the hyoid, is a bone that isn't on this particular skeleton because it's the only bone that doesn't articulate with other bone, but it's floating-ish here, connected to cartilage, and helps control the musculature of the tongue. Okay, then we have the sternum. It's divided into 3 different parts: the manubrium, the body of the sternum, and then the xiphoid process right here. Okay, ribs. So we have 12 ribs, and 1 through 7 articulate with the sternum, and then 8 through 12 do not, and 11 and 12 are actually floating ribs, meaning that they don't actually articulate at all with this anterior surface. So rib 1 on the right, rib 1 on the left, rib 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So those are the ones that are known as like true ribs. And then false ribs are those that connect with the sternum either with a network of costal cartilage or they don't connect at all. So that would be rib, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. This portion is made of cartilage. And then we have 11 and 12, which is hard to see that it doesn't connect, but they just hang out up here, down here rather, 11 and 12. Okay, so that is the rib cage. And come on, buddy. I think we'll start on, he's not wanting to hang out on his little stand. So I think now we will, oh my gosh, why is this happening? Okay, that's okay. Let's go to the arm. So we have already done the clavicle and the scapula, the shoulder area. So this is the humerus, then the ulna, the radius, and now we'll do the carpals or the wrist bones. So just below, or rather the sort of the row of bones that is most proximal, we'll start on the thumb side. So the scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and the pisiform. And then more distal to that is the row that starts with the, or just above the pisiform, the hamate, the capitate, trapezoid, and the trapezium. Next we have, as we move distally, we have the metacarpals. So the thumb is the first metacarpal, and on the right side in this case, the second right metacarpal, third right metacarpal, fourth right metacarpal, and fifth right metacarpal. Then again, moving distally, we have 3 sets of phalanges. We have the proximal first phalange, the proximal second phalange, proximal third phalange, proximal fourth phalange, and proximal fifth phalange. Then we have the we have the middle first phalange, the middle second phalange, the middle third phalange, the middle fourth phalange, and the middle fifth phalange. And then we have the distal, so the furthest from the center of the body, the first distal phalanx, the second, or actually I should have said phalanx, because phalange I think maybe is plural. So the proximal, middle, and distal phalanx of each finger. So this is the first distal phalanx, second distal phalanx, third distal phalanx, fourth distal phalanx, and fifth distal phalanx. Okay, so that's the hand. And let's see if I can't just set this back up again. We'll move to the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle is made of 2 of the pelvic bones, and each pelvic bone is made of 3 fused bones. Sorry, I'm going to hold this, so I hope it's not annoying, but my stand is combusted. So this is the ilium. Down here is the ischium. Let's see if I can. It's like the opposite. There we go. Ischium, and then the pubis. I'm trying to point backwards. Okay, so ilium, ischium, pubis, 2 of those together making the pelvic girdle. Then we have the femur, longest bone in the body. The tibia is the larger of the 2 lower leg bones, and the fibula, which helps stabilize the ankle and the tibia. And then we have the foot. The biggest bone is the calcaneus, this heel bone. Then we have the talus up above. Let's see if I can just hold the foot. Okay, talus. You have the cuboid, the navicular bone, and then you have the medial, intermediate, and distal cuneiform bones. Then, just like the with the hand, we have metatarsals. Tarsals are ankle. So metatarsals. So we have the first metatarsal, second metatarsal, third metatarsal, fourth metatarsal, fifth metatarsal, and this is on the right foot. Then we have the phalanges again. So we have the first proximal phalanx, second proximal phalanx, third proximal phalanx, fourth proximal phalanx, and fifth proximal phalanx. Then we have the first middle phalanx, second middle phalanx, third middle phalanx, fourth middle phalanx, fifth middle phalanx. And then we have The